Okay, good morning. Thank you very much. So thank you very much, Bernd, for the kind introduction and the situational speech. Very stimulating, as usual. I want to give you a quick state of play of where we are with the implementation of the cloud computing strategy. It's just over a year since we adopted the action, and I guess you're interested to know a little bit about where things are. And I want to, let me see whether it's, where do I point it? That's right, it's good. So, okay, the first thing to remember about why we're in this game is the conviction of my Commissioner Vice President Cruz that in practice, cloud has enormous economic potential and benefits. So the data can always be discussed, but actually it's quite likely that some of these large figures that we put up on our slides and that we put into our documents are an underestimate of the transformative effect, the indirect effect of cloud adoption when we finally get there. So growth and jobs, and in a couple of weeks' time, actually the end of next week, we've got a European Council which will have a strong orientation towards digital economy. And we think the cloud is one of the key forces inside of the digital economy which is driving the growth potential of this very important part of the overall growth potential of the economy. But, and this was the point in the communication, we still have tremendous problems in getting access to this growth potential, unlocking it, unleashing it, as we put it, when we look at the European scene, actually when we look at the global scene. So although Europe is a little bit behind the curve in respect of the United States as regards cloud adoption, as far as we can tell, also the potential is not being taken up as fast as we would expect to see. In Europe, this is clear. It's the usual digital single market problematics, fragmented markets, lack of transparency, and as Bernd just mentioned, the continuing concerns with security. Security and trust are the critical things that we have to solve in order to make cloud take off. So when we look at the situation, and this is a slide which I produced for a discussion actually with our own informatics department, we call it DG Digit, and a lot of it's based here in Luxembourg. And I was trying to map out some of the things that have come out of our conversations, particularly with public administration managers, about how they feel about cloud and why they're not adopting it. And that's more or less the situation that the informatics departments, at least, are not adopting cloud. Actually, we think that there's quite a lot of business unit adoption of cloud, as it were, underneath the counter. But that's a whole story and extremely difficult to detect. So have this discussion about why should we adopt cloud? And there's a whole set of things which are driving. And the most important things, I think, are issues around scalability, getting high performance, the latest versions of technology at a good price, and being able to upgrade seamlessly and efficiently. So in the discussion with our own department, we always have the nice case that we only upgraded from the Microsoft platform of 2003 last year. So we're only about 10 years behind the curve. And why is that? And it's because of the problems of implementing even a relatively standardized platform inside an enterprise-specific environment. And the advantage of cloud, if you adopt standardized, relatively similar from all of the other users, if you adopt those standardized solutions, you can get massive cost economies and performance economies. So that's why the scalability, the technology, and the standards thing are on the top side of the curve. those are the advantages. And there's the things that you can't ignore as well, which are driving change, which is around mobility, already mentioned, bring your own device. And that's actually making the organization much less hermetically sealed, much more porous than it was in the past. So the old traditions of data center managers, informatics, purchasing don't work anymore, because actually we're doing a lot more sharing of our platforms with business partners, with customers, with citizens, even between agencies and so forth. So actually we have to think about things in a different way, and part of that drive is coming from the fact that people want to use the applications, the devices that they use in their private life, in their professional environment. So in a sense, it's kind of a wall of water which we're trying to hold back and say, well, we're not quite sure how to deal with you yet, so just stay there. And then I put budgeting and costs and interoperability on the axis, on the dividing line between the two, because these are mixed blessings. Actually, the cost models of cloud are not completely convincing yet, particularly over the longer term. And that's relating in part due to the fact that budgetary planning for IT resourcing tends to still be regarded as a capital expenditure, but also just the predictability of future spend and how you scale and move in relation to flexibility, how much you become reliant and therefore dependent on the pricing models of your supplier. These are big concerns. The interoperability concern, again, Bernd mentioned it. You know, we have a lot of different applications out there, and getting them to work together now and tomorrow and into the future is a big concern. But then there's a lot of things which are dragging us back, particularly issues relating to capital expenditure caps, and worries about things like security, auditability. Can you actually see who's been looking at your data? Can you look to see that the security features are properly done? How do you do that? The data location issues. Can you actually make sure the data stays and is only accessed by people who are within the jurisdictions which you care about? Are the services I'm buying compliant with the rules? Are the contracts ones which I would want? And one of the shifts of cloud is actually we need to go towards standardized contracts. And can I get my data out if I need to? Can I actually get my data out with some of the functionality? And how much functionality should I expect, given the fact that feature and function are part of the selling proposition? So these are not easy problems to solve. There's a lot of issues in there which we're trying to look at through the implementation of the cloud strategy. And it's going to take time, because it's going to be built on experience and experimentation. So that means that we have then the consequence, and this is the kind of continually updated famous Gartner hype curve, which actually moves through time. So actually the kind of the curve stays the same, and you stay almost in the same position on it, but the things along the axis, which you can't read, tend to shift. But it's not a mature technology yet. It's not a proven technology, but there is experience on some aspects of it emerging. And then one of the other things that I just want to put on the table is actually cloud is not a homogeneous brick. It's not just a single thing. And particularly when you're looking at corporates moving towards cloud, whether it be public or private corporates, actually it's a range of cloudification from the old traditional on-premise type solutions to some degree through outsourcing to the full public cloud solutions. And there are a lot of experimentation taking place now with enterprise clouds, with enterprise-specific platforms, multi-agency, multi-tenancy, community clouds, and so on. And there's pros and cons of the different ways of approaching that. And one of the things that we've been trying to say when we're talking to public administrations, when we're talking to our own public administration, DG, is start to experiment on those areas where you feel relatively secure. So storage as a service, which is encrypted. We know that some public authorities are moving there. Citizen-facing or consumer-facing portals. where the data anyway is rather open, and so on. So there are areas where you can make a start and start to see how the cost models work and gain experience. So that's the preface. Now, the European cloud computing strategy was all about trying to make Europe cloud friendly and beyond that cloud active, actually put it into a strong position for take-up. And as a reminder, we had 3 actions. One was relating to standards, the second was relating to contract terms, and the third was relating to public procurement. And the nice bubble map of all that shows the actions that we've unleashed on the world and onto the community over the period. So we had a review meeting yesterday with a lot of the people we've been having conversations with, and a lot of those are coming from industry, from what we call the Cloud Select Industry Group. And the work's been going on for about 8, 9, almost 10 months now. And I think we're making some progress, but it's long work. It takes a long time to try to structure the environment and to understand it better. So starting from the top, we asked the European Telecom Standards Institute to organize a mapping of existing clouds in relation to the standards which exist today, which are used in cloud or could be relevant to cloud. So that work's ongoing. I'll say a word about that in a minute. We asked the Cloud Select Industry Group, which is about 40 corporates plus some of the other firms, other organizations which are helping us, to help us in the identification of the relevant certification schemes to cloud. We asked the Select Industry Group also to help us, particularly with this preparation of a code of conduct, which could be prepared for endorsement by the data protection authorities in Europe. So really something that says, okay, if you sign up to this code of conduct, then you have you are in a very good position in relation to being compliant with the data protection rules in Europe. And we have a third stream of work of the Cloud Select Industry Group, which is looking at service level agreements and how we can understand these and typify them so that they become a bit more structured, a bit more predictable than they have been so far. We did work on research. We've come to an end of that now, and we will be in the next few months discussing the work program for the first call for Horizon 2020. So that work's been finished beginning of this year. We published a report, and that's done for us for the moment. I'm happy to say it looks like we have a fairly substantial pocket of money for cloud research to continue. And then the part on the European Cloud Partnership, which has 2 parts. Steering Board, which we launched last year in November, which is a collection of very high-level people, both public and private sector, and the Cloud for Europe project, which Linda Strick will talk about later. Where are we in some of those things? Well, as far as the ETSI mapping, we're planning to have a deliverable at the end of this year. So the plan was end of the year for at least a pretty good detailed map of what are the standards relating to cloud. Progress is going fine. We will have a deliverable there. It is really complicated stuff. We had a lot of discussion at the beginning about what kinds of things do we mean by standards. Do we include even things like white papers and technical specifications, or do we have to have formally adopted standards? What should be included and what should not? We had a lot of discussion about between the partners in the group, whether or not this is an open discussion, whether it's all telecoms, whether it's all ICT sector, and so on. And we've come through a lot of those things. And one of the things I used to say a lot was, the European Telecom Standards Institute, ETSI, is just doing the coordination, but it's not just about Europe, it's global. It's not just about telecoms, it's anything IT, and it's not just standards. It's what we regard as useful technical descriptions, which people are using when they're buying cloud services or when they're offering cloud services. The work had produced was broken into 3 work streams. One was on role and responsibilities, the second was on defining use cases, and the third is on actually mapping the standards to the activities under those use cases. The roles and responsibilities was important because the existing mapping of who the actors were and what they are doing was not entirely mappable onto the European situation. So that work happened, and I think good results came out. The second use case was a very active process. We ended up with something like 110 use cases, and of that, they've selected down 21 for more detailed analysis. Even so, the number of standards involved is very large, and there's a very complex kind of lookup table, which is available online, where you can start to see some of the standards which have identified and what activity, say, launching of a service or termination of a service, or I want to move my data, you have those problems. What are the standards I would use for in order to structure that discussion with my supplier? The list of certification schemes, this is the work coming out of the Cloud Select Industry Group, and that work has actually identified a list of about 10, 12 certification schemes which seem relevant to cloud. None of them are 100%, and they also have different scope, different applicability. We've been doing this work with our agency, the European Network and Information Security Agency. They've produced a first draft report on this, which has been discussed inside of the Select Industry Group. And we hope very soon to move that forward, to create a kind of a more formalized listing of the relevant certification schemes, what they do for you, and a meta framework which would allow them to us to understand them in terms of what they're actually offering, because it's not always clear. That's what we'll deliver round about the end of the first quarter into the second quarter of next year. Cloud service level agreements. This turns out to be very, very difficult work. We are continuing to work inside of the Cloud Select Industry Group. They've identified a set of 11 attributes. Particularly, it's relatively obvious where you have quantitative performance criteria like availability and so on. But even so, availability can differ depending on who you're talking to and how they're measuring it. So the whole issue of what metrics you would use for measuring something like availability is still something we're struggling with. And that's one of the easier things to talk about. When you get to some of the issues which are things like sanctions or whatever, then there's a discussion about whether that's even part of a service level agreement and how anyway you would put that into a common reference framework for performance standard benchmarking. The code of conduct work on data protection is very interesting. It started later than the other dialogues. It's started in April. There is already a fully developed draft, particularly with an SME orientation. And it's been presented in first draft to the Article 29 Working Party, which is the collection of data protection authorities. The work on this will continue over the autumn, and by about mid next year, we should have something which we think we can present to the data protection authorities, to the Article 29 Working Party, which they could have a look at for endorsement. So it's important for us to have them in the ground floor, the discussion from the beginning, because if we presented something to them at the last minute, it's not going to work. It won't meet their needs, and there will be an allergic reaction to it. But on the other hand, this is hard work, because producing a code of conduct on data protection which fits all needs is going to be tricky. The governance structures, the control structures, maybe the referencing to certification frameworks which are necessary in here, are all things that we are continuing to work on. The model terms part is the part which is being led by our colleagues in DG Justice, so that's the services of Mrs. Redding. And here they are launching an expert group which should have at least one meeting before the end of the year. And this expert group will look to see whether, when you're talking about take it or leave it contracts for small businesses and for consumers, whether or not there should be some model contract terms which you would find in the contract services. So that's the kind of all the stakeholder work we've got ongoing. And as I say, we had a long day yesterday discussing it all. And I'm optimistic, but it's really midstream at the moment. The other big action we're doing is on the European Cloud Partnership Steering Board. So we had the steering board launched November last year. It's presided by President Ilves. He's the president of Estonia. It's very high level. It includes CEOs of major corporates such as SAP, Atos, Software AG, and so on, plus some very important chief information officers from the national administration, so the BSI in Germany, the French are there, and so on. So we've got a number of people. We've got one SME also in the mix. It's a very interesting discussion, and this photograph is taken from the launch of the Cloud for Europe project, which is the other arm of our work, which Linda will talk about. And this happened in one of the orangery of the President's Gardens in Estonia, in Tallinn, in July this year. Here you can see Vice President Cruz, President Ilves, and Reinhard Posch, who is the Chief Information Architect of the Austrian government. We've got a next steering board meeting coming up on the 14th of November, and the official launch conference of the Cloud for Europe project in Berlin on the 14th and 15th of November. And that, I think, provides the opportunity for Linda to explain a little bit more about that. So thank you very much for your attention.